Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Kirk Watson and the Honorable Dan Patrick. Thank you, sir. Put you right there. Senator, good to see you again. Please put you right there. Chairman, Senator, good morning. Thanks for coming back. Know it's busy. Appreciate you being here. I thought we'd start with the special, since that's where we find ourselves right now. Chairman, you are on the Committee on Redistricting. Is it a good thing for us to be back? Is having a special that at least begins with a redistricting matter on the call doing the people's business?
I believe we're doing the people's business. We should have addressed it during the regular session, but the special has been called now to address the maps, and Senator Watson and I were just talking about this. The call is very specific to approve the maps that we have now.
Right.
And so hopefully we can quickly get this behind us, and then we'll see if the governor adds more to the call.
Chairman, how will Texas be better for having come back to do this?
Well, right now we're running under tentative maps. It's up in the air in terms of where a person's district is. It's still up in the air because there's several court cases involved.
Yeah.
And while I'm not an expert in that area, it is something that we have to resolve and to move forward so people know who represents them.
You're satisfied, Chairman, with the maps as they currently exist?
In the Senate, I've not really taken a close look, and we'll review these now.
You will.
The House and the congressional map, but the Senate map, I don't want to speak for Senator Watson or Democrats, but I think the lawyers from all sides yesterday in San Antonio, or the day before, whatever that was, said that the Senate maps were approved.
Senator, is this a good deal for the Democrats and for the state to have the Senate map approved?
Well, I think we could have done the Senate map even during the regular session. I told the Lieutenant Governor that several times, that I thought there was agreement by all of the parties with regard to that. The difficulty was that the original bill that was filed was not just a Senate map. What happened in the regular session was the redistricting bill wasn't a Senate map, a congressional map, and a Texas House map. It was a map that had everything in it. And I'll come back to that, but even had they been done separately, it might have still been an issue. The Senate map, I think everybody agreed, as Senator Patrick said yesterday, I think there was stipulation by the state and by the plaintiffs in the federal court in San Antonio that will be the map. Although an interim map, it could be the remedial map.
Yeah.
The problem was that there is still ongoing litigation and debate legitimately in the courts with regard to the congressional map and to the Texas House map.
Right.
Part of the reason I don't think we ought to be doing this right now is we ought to let the process that began with the previous redistricting work its way through the courts, except when you could have an agreement like on the Senate map.
Yeah.
The problem for the regular session was that from the perspective of those of us who feel like we are in a situation where we need to protect the interest of minority voters in the state that are challenging these maps, is that if we'd have passed the Senate map out of the Senate and had sent it over to the House, then what could have happened is the House could have amended that legislation by putting the congressional map and the Texas House maps on and sent it back over, and it would have been a simple 16, as opposed to allowing for the 2/3 rule to work in that circumstance. So we never could agree, regardless of the number of times that there was an effort by the Lieutenant Governor to try to go ahead and bring that up. So my position has always been we ought to let that process work. There's a reason for that. And frankly, we need that court system to work, particularly in the context of what we're faced with when we've already had a finding by a federal court that the map, the process that was followed last time was as a result of some purposeful discrimination.
You brought this up, in fact, Monday night when the special was gavelled in. You stood up and began to pepper the Lieutenant Governor with parliamentary inquiries. He looked like he'd eaten a bad piece of fish. Every time you asked a question, his face got greener and greener, it seemed like. You're not particularly satisfied that this process has been good or fair, are you?
No, I'm not. And I particularly think it's unfair and inappropriate when what we're attempting to do is get around the process or the ordinary process or procedure that is typically followed.
This is the 2/3 rule.
That's right, when you have bills. The Lieutenant Governor, in answers to my parliamentary inquiries, pretty well made it clear that although he recognizes the 2/3 rule, he recognizes that we are operating under the rules of the 83rd regular session, that when it comes to redistricting in special sessions, we're going to play by a different set of rules.
Right.
And I don't think that is appropriate, and I frankly think that it will work against what some people are attempting to do as they try to push through these maps.
Chairman, is the 2/3 rule something that should be disregarded during this process?
Since Senator Watson and I have joined, we've had several special sessions, and I know you all were debating whether or not we had the 2/3 rule or not in each one of those specials. My memory is that we did not, and I know we did not in the last special, and we have not. Of course, you know, my argument is that the 2/3 rule should be the 60% rule.
You've wanted that for
Go
some
from
time.
21 to 19, because 2/3, in my view, should be set for the highest priority issues,
Yeah.
constitutional amendments, et cetera, and that 19 is, not because there are 19 Republicans. If there were 19 Democrats, I would be sitting here saying the same thing. I think that the 60% that ties in with the United States cloture vote is appropriate. Our founding.
How's that working for the Senate?
Well, I can't speak for the mess in Washington on either side, but our founding fathers clearly said, and remember, Congress votes on a simple majority in Washington, D.C.,
Right.
and our founding fathers said that if you allow 1/3 of the membership to have control, then you have tyranny of the minority, because the majority never actually have control. But the rules are the rules, and I fought to change those rules to the 60% to 19, which is the closest number of senators. But I've worked within the 2/3 since I've been a senator, and you use those rules, as Senator Watson does, and the Democrats, to your best advantage to get your legislation passed or to stop legislation that you don't want to see pass. And so until the rules change, we'll operate in the regular session under those rules.
But you're comfortable with no 2/3 rule, or you've said you're comfortable with no 2/3 rule on redistricting.
So what I want to say, and it's not a disagreement, it's just I want to be clear on what has happened in the past. In 2003, what it appears happened at that point in time is that there was a special called session. It involved redistricting. And in 2003, there was a blocker bill. The tradition had been that there would be a blocker bill. There was a blocker bill in the first called session. Things didn't work out so well. So the lieutenant governor then said, we're going to change, and we're not going to have a blocker bill in the second and third call. And you'll recall that some folks went to Albuquerque as a result of all that.
Some did.
Yeah,
Yes.
And when redistricting...
I hear it's nice this time of year.
When redistricting was taken care of...
You don't have any trips planned now, do you?
None.
Okay, good. Well, just want to be sure.
Actually, I had some planned, and this is messing it up.
Not necessarily.
Yeah. So what happened was, once redistricting was taken care of, the fourth called session, they went back to having a blocker bill.
Right.
Then in the 2005 period, there were 3 special sessions, and all 3 had blocker bills.
So you can cut this round or cut it.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And then in 2007, there were none. 2009, there were, but if you'll recall, it was we didn't pass something on comprehensive development agreements. It's
right.
Very short, sweet, simple. We were out in a couple of
day.
days. Yes, we were out in a couple of, I don't remember how many it was.
Right.
2011, again, congressional redistricting was on that, and so the lieutenant governor took the position of blocker bill. I think it runs afoul of a couple of things. One is, when you're dealing with voting rights, they take the position, we're not going to follow the ordinary rules. And I think that is one of the things that not following the ordinary rules was some of the evidence that the federal court looked at when it said the state engaged in purposeful discrimination. So I think it is, I wish people would learn from that, and let's do it the right way.
Right. Let's move on and go back, in fact, to the regular session, if you don't mind. We had a budget. That's what you all are really there to do. The only thing that you have to do is pass a budget. You voted against.
Yes.
You voted for. A lot of your colleagues, as I understand it, Senator Patrick, Chairman, were not particularly happy that after asking for certain things to be in the budget, you then turned around and voted no. Can you explain that vote, please?
Sure. Most of what I asked to be in the budget that was in the budget had been cut, specifically dealing with some education programs that I felt strongly about.
Yeah.
Secondly, the budget, as the process evolved, became a 3-part budget, tied in with House Bill 7, earlier House Bill 10, House Bill 1025. I didn't like what I saw in some of those bills and voted against several of those bills. And at the end of the day, we ended up spending, and you can look at numbers, and numbers are in the eye of the beholder, and you can make a case depending on how you want to look session to session, budget to budget, rainy day fund, general revenue, combined supplemental budgets. But there was a significant increase in spending. I don't believe...
you know, the leadership made the opposite case. Leadership was handing out literature to show in graphical form that this was actually an extremely modest increase in spending.
Well, I think leadership is wrong in that. And
who specifically is wrong?
And I think what is interesting...
Is it the Lieutenant Governor who's wrong, or Chairman Williams?
And I think what is interesting, Evan, is that a budget...
Yes, your answer is interesting.
And I agree. I think a budget that my friends, and we have, you know, Kirk and I are friends, and the Democrats and the Republicans, as John Whitmire said on the last day, we worked better this session together than in his memory, and he's been there longer than anyone, and we accomplished a lot, and Kirk was a huge help to me on our education bills, as were the Democrats. But a budget that Wendy Davis and John Whitmire love is a budget that Republican primary voters and conservatives probably don't.
How long before you voted no did Chairman Williams know that you were a no vote? He seemed caught flat-footed by it.
I had said to him early on that I probably was a no vote. I was very unhappy. We had several key education programs that I believe should have been funded.
Yeah.
And they were cut. It was not explained why they were cut. For example, paying for SAT, paying for PSAT, paying for career explorations, pre-K. Right. Some of those dollars.
So despite your best efforts, those things were not in there.
Yeah, and unbeknownst to me, yet there were other programs and dollars that suddenly appeared. Right. And again, so I didn't like how we handled the system benefit fund. I mean, sending out a check for $500 million at one time. I'm really shocked that any Republican could vote for that, quite frankly.
Senator, there are a lot of things in this budget that Democrats didn't like also, and in fact, in a previous iteration of a budget vote, a couple Democrats, in fact, voted against it. You were for it, essentially, probably grudgingly, I'm guessing, but for it all along.
Yeah, look, if I were given the ability to write this budget, I would have written a different budget from the very beginning part of it. But from the very beginning part, Chairman Williams had indicated that there were things he was going to listen to, he was going to work with us on, and we were going to try to get to a better result. And that proved to be true. This is not, in my mind, a perfect budget, but it is a budget that I felt comfortable voting for a couple of reasons. One is, as we went into the legislative session, the number one priority of the Equity Center was to do away with the factor, and I'm not going to get into the weeds on that, but there was one specific thing that was their number one priority. We were able to take care of that. We also wanted to restore a large amount of the cuts that had been made in education. We were able to do a great deal of that. All the way through, as that process worked its way through, all the way to the supplemental budget at the very end, where there's another $200 million that was put. Now, I agree with Senator Patrick. I actually voted against one of the budget bills, not the budget, but one of the budget bills that had dealt with the System Benefit Fund for different reasons than what he voted against it, but I certainly understand the reason that he felt compelled to vote against that, but I wasn't in favor of doing away with the System Benefit Fund. I think that that was a mistake, and that was one of the reasons I ended up voting against 7. In addition, this was the first time since we have been in the Senate that there was actually a meaningful pay raise for state employees. And for me, that was a big deal that we needed to take care of.
You have a lot of constituents who are state employees.
Absolutely I do, and love them all. But it's really it was a problem. We needed to deal with that. In addition to that, we did something this session that ends up being part of the budget, and that is dealing with employee retirement system and the teacher retirement system. And I worked very hard with Senator Duncan in those areas, and we made a difference. We put money, meaningful money for the first time in my memory in mental health care. So there's a lot of good things in this budget that lead to a vote for it, even though it is
not perfect.
It's far from perfect.
Right.
But the final thing I'll say about it is that I said this to a reporter right before we voted. In my view, there were more members of the Senate knowing more about this budget than in any previous budget Dan and I had ever been involved in. This process was a far better process of getting to a budget, however you ended up voting on it,
right,
than I've seen since I've been in the Senate.
Senator, both of you mentioned in different ways public education. Going
Yes.
into this session, this was going to be a big session for public education, beginning with the question of whether you would all be able to put money back into public ed after the cuts of last session, and with the appeal of the school finance lawsuit looming. And in fact, you put in more than $3 billion. And again, while the perfect can't be the enemy of the very good, you know, people say, oh, well, it could be better, but in fact, people are generally happy with that. You actually went in, though, on the non-funding side with a very ambitious agenda on school choice. There was also a lot of discussion of rigor in curriculum during the session. I wonder if you pronounce on the choice and on the rigor side this session to be a success. It appears that you didn't get much of what at the beginning you went in hoping to get.
Just the opposite.
Really?
We got most of our package, if not all of our package, passed out of committee, and most of it passed out of the Senate. We passed, our goal was HB 5, Senate Bill 3 combined, which was reducing STAR test 15 to 5. That's change, creating flexibility in our graduation pathways with one foundation degree and endorsements, replacing the distinguished, recommended, and minimum degree. That's flexibility, that's choice. It gives school districts, gives teachers choice. When you cut STAR test from 15 to 5, each test has about 4 or 5 benchmark tests.
Yep.
That's cutting testing 40 to 50 days. That gives teachers more time to teach. That was important. Second priority was SB 2, which was the charter bill.
Right.
It's the best charter bill we've passed. I've passed it twice before, but it didn't get a vote in the House.
And it's as ambitious as you wanted it to be?
You would always, I would like for the cap to have been totally removed, but it's a very ambitious bill, and it will bring about choice. Yeah. We passed teacher evaluation. We passed online. We passed credit by exam. We passed more legislation for disabled and autistic children has been passed in a while. The only bill, quite frankly, that didn't pass were 2, which was the Achievement School District, which would allow the commissioner to take over a failing school, kind of with a SWAT team of educators. It passed the Senate, I think, 31-0, or close to that.
Right. And you refiled it during the special.
Well, Senator West, it was his bill. I joined, so I'm going to let him file that bill. And it went to the House and was called on a point of order. The point of orders in the House are extremely frustrating because in the bill analysis, instead of saying 2.48, it said 2.49. And the whole bill, all of Senator West's work, was pulled down because of one digit change. It had nothing to do with the bill. The votes are there. So I hope the governor puts that on the call if he extends the call. And then the business tax credit did not pass. It came out with one Democrat vote out of committee. It was blocked on the Senate floor. But if you look at our agenda, it was a bold agenda. And working with all of the senators, almost all those bills passed with 27, 28, 29, or 30
You think the
votes.
Senate would vote for the business scholarship if there was a problem previously? You think it would suddenly come back to life in this special?
I don't
Senator
know.
Watson shaking his head.
Yeah, I don't think the Democrats have a vote, but if there's no blocker bill, I think it slides through.
There you have it.
There you go. Well, there's the right. That's a pretty important clause.
But I want to give Senator Watson great credit. You know, sometimes in politics, people say, well, you know, they want you to work together, but be careful, don't work too much together. And the fact is that there were countless times when Senator Watson and I worked together to make sure we could pass legislation. I believe that there was more education reform passed in this session than maybe any other session. And it was what the superintendents wanted, the teachers wanted, the parents wanted. I'm not so sure if people above my pay grade always wanted it. But we did what the educators, the parents, the teachers want, and the business community.
I'm not going to let that go, but I want to let Senator Watson say what about the business scholarship thing.
Look, that was one that we blocked and would continue to block so long as the rules allow for that.
And as well as you work together on other things, you're not going to be a yes vote on that.
I'm not going to be a yes vote on that, but that's important. What you're hearing here is important to know some of the detail of it. And I appreciate him in his nice comments about how I worked with him on these things. You know, the Senate Democrats, when we talk about the 2/3 rule, the way I tried to approach this, I'm chair of the Senate Democratic Caucus, and the way I tried to approach this and the way the Senate Democrats tried to approach it is we're not opposed to reform in public education. We were not opposed to reducing the tests. We weren't opposed to trying to figure out how we do a better job in terms of dealing with charter schools and being able to, in fact, we wanted to figure out a way to do a better job of closing the bad charter schools. So what we did is there were some things that, yes, we're going to be opposed to unless we can figure out a way to fix it. But that's the approach we took, is there a way to fix these things to make them better public policy? And not just block for the sake of blocking, but achieve some of the goals we want to achieve as well. We have constituencies that we also have to address. So what happened on the charter bill, what happened on the testing bill, to just give them broad general labels, is there was they came out of committee. They didn't have Democratic votes coming out of committee. But during the course of the process, the chairman and I and others worked pretty hard together to get to something. And I think the charter bill passed 29-2.
30-1.
Okay, yeah, 30. And then
actually, it was a Republican who voted.
I thought that was the other bill. I thought that was Nick. He voted.
No, the charter bill.
But the point is,
overwhelming.
Right.
And that was a result. That was a result, I think, of at least two things. One is a willingness of senators to work together and recognize that just because we may disagree on the first bill that's filed, it doesn't mean somebody's anti-reform.
Right.
Which is the way sometimes politics gets divided up. The second is that the 2/3 rule created some leverage for some folks that if it weren't there, you wouldn't have had.
It requires people to collaborate.
It brings some collaboration together.
Yeah.
And so what happens is the chairman ends up passing two bills with overwhelming support that everybody's pretty much happy with where we got on those. Not everybody got everything they wanted.
Right.
And that's a value to the Senate. I think you end up with better public policy as opposed to a situation where a bill gets filed and then we'll just, as he said, roll it through.
Chairman, I'm happy to have you declare victory on a lot of the public ed things that you named, but
it was a team effort.
I seem to recall at the beginning of the session you had a far more ambitious and somewhat differentiated intent on choice that ultimately got passed.
Well, choice is in the flexibility, and I talked about this before when we were here.
Right.
Choice was about giving choice to superintendents. Superintendents said to me when I traveled the state last fall and early in this session, said, you know, Dan, if I could operate my failing schools like a charter by the same rules, I could turn them around. Well, for the first time, they now can operate under charter rules. That's a major choice. So that was part of the choice. Yeah. Teacher choice. We've given teachers much more flexibility. We killed the CSCO program that was shackling many teachers, which is a major issue. Again, reducing the number of tasks and creating more flexibility. The charter schools will give parents more choice. When we get the Achievement District bill passed and special, which I hope comes on the call, that will create more choice. Right. The smallest piece was the business tax credit. What we pass will impact hundreds of thousands of students.
But again, you got to get the votes, though.
No, I'm saying what we passed.
What you passed
is going to impact hundreds of thousands of students. The business tax credit, I still feel, is a very important bill. That would have impacted about 10,000 students. I'm still fighting for that bill, but that didn't pass. But you don't look at passing 90% of your agenda and calling it a failure. Right. You look at passing 90% of your agenda and saying we took a bold step forward. Yeah. The reason I feel so strongly about the business tax credit, I go back to what I said on this platform back in November, is that we already have choice. If you're rich enough, you send your children to private school. If you're mobile enough, you move to the suburbs. What's any realtor say when someone comes and looks at a house? Tell me about the school district. Yeah. People don't sit in traffic commuting to downtown Austin because they like sitting in traffic. They move to the suburbs in many cases, in most cases, if they have children, for better school districts in their view. But if you're a poor single mom in the inner city who depends on public transportation to go to work, you can't move to the suburbs for a better school. You don't have the money to send your child to a private school. So why should you be denied the opportunity to send your child to a school that you think is best for them? It's really that simple. To me, it's a civil rights issue, it's a moral issue, it's an ethical issue. I don't know why we are heck bent on saying to a poor person, I'm sorry, you don't get the same privilege of someone with a few more zeros in their checkbook or who's mobile.
Can you quickly make the case against? I want to ask one more education question.
Well, I'm not sure the Democrats really had to do anything. I thought the House pretty well put a stake in the heart of what he doesn't want to call a voucher bill, he calls a choice bill, but they pretty well, I mean, in fact, we had that discussion during the course of the legislative
But it was blocked in the Senate.
Clearly it was blocked.
I had 20 votes. I was one vote away.
I think we could have passed it out 31-0, and the House would have killed it because.
Well, but our job is to get a bill out of the Senate.
Well,
that's our job.
At a time when we are not doing all that we can do in terms of taking care of our schools. And we have to fight our public school system, and we have to fight the way we have to fight to get the funding that we even got in this budget in an effort to do it. It does not make sense to me to be giving tax breaks for scholarships, what he calls scholarship programs, so that we take money out of our public school system, particularly during a legislative session when...
It wasn't taking any money out of the public system.
Well, that's why we have the debate.
And why you will have the debate.
Yeah, why we will have a debate.
Right? Yeah. Is the governor going to veto HB 5? You know, there's been some discussion of this. There was some discussion toward the end of the session that he may have believed that you all rolled back testing too far, and that he might veto HB 5 and then use the opportunity of a special session to come back and try to get a bill more to his liking. What do you think is going to happen on that?
I would never presume to speak for the governor and his veto pen. I would be surprised. I would be greatly disappointed. The bill passed 31-0, and I believe 147-2 or 148-2. Yeah. So overwhelming majority of both parties. The business community loves the bill. For the first time, we're going to put a focus on career as well as college. Today, under the current law, if you're in the minimum education plan, diploma plan, you're not allowed to apply to a four-year college. We've changed that. Yeah. We have added rigor, not decreased rigor. We've added accountability. We've just put in flexibility. And the test, I will tell you, Evan, that when we started, I didn't have a number in my mind of like 5 is the right number, or 6 or 7, excuse me. And neither did our committee. And we had such a great committee of balance. I mean, I had some freshmen. I had Taylor, Paxton, and Campbell. Yep. I had veterans like Seliger and Duncan had never been on education. Then I had Lucio, Vanderpute, and Watson. So, I mean, and West. So we represented West Texas, Dallas, San Antonio, Houston. It was a balanced committee. And at the end of the day, after 2,000 witnesses and a lot of testimony, we came up with the number of English 1, and English 2, Algebra 1, U.S. History, and Biology, along with the SAT and the PSAT, which I was told was going to be funded, but somehow that money disappeared.
But as you say, you don't know what the governor's going to do, but you're hoping he does not.
But even beyond the committee work, what gets lost in part of the story on this bill is that this bill was originally blocked, but work continued, and even people that weren't on the committee immersed themselves in some of those issues to try to get to a bill, because I think the Senate legitimately wanted to get to some reform. And the day, I guess, it passed on the Senate, maybe it was the day before, we were in the back room with a lot of us trying to negotiate and figure out how we could get it to the floor. So it ended up being a bill that a lot of thought went into.
And you invited me to the caucus, I went to the Democrat caucus, I laid out everything step by step.
I hope it doesn't get
reducing testing was one of the bipartisan issues of the session. Transportation was another issue that we thought going into the session. You know, the Speaker talked about it, members of the Senate talked about it, we have a genuine crisis. Phil Wilson testified, I believe, before the Senate during this session that TxDOT was soon going to be maxed out on its ability to amass debt. We know the population is growing at 1,000 people a day. The roads we have now aren't good enough. We need more roads. You've heard the whole litany, and yet we come out of the session with bupkis, with nothing.
It's another reason I voted against the budget. I didn't feel like we addressed transportation. I felt like we cut too much money from border security and money that we have used in the past to pursue drug cartels. I didn't like how we used the rainy day fund. And at the end of the day, again, and I appreciate the chairman's work on, and there are some good things in the budget, Chairman Williams' work on the budget, but I'm not going to vote for a budget with all of the dollars that we had available to us that didn't address transportation, reduces border security, leaves out some key education components, spends rainy day money that didn't need to be spent. At one point, we paid for the school deferral in the beginning of the session out of the budget. The next thing I know, it's paid out of the rainy day fund. It's just moving.
But so you feel like transportation was a miss?
Transportation was a huge miss.
This is an issue you know well. You've served on this. You know this issue as well as almost anyone.
It's nuts.
Yeah. And I was on the committee as well.
So what happened?
I wish I could put my finger on why it is that we're ignoring this enormous infrastructure. It is infrastructure.
Is it that water and public education were just viewed as more important by the members?
I don't know that that's the case. I'm so pleased with what we did on water. Yeah. And I voted for what we did with regard to education. And I think we could do better there. But again, I don't know why the transportation stuff keeps falling out. So for those that don't know, you've gone through a couple of variations on this. Going into the session, you had really what would be arguably two competing approaches. And fundamental to all this is you need new revenue. We can't continue to operate without some new revenue source. Now, I do believe that what I just said causes a significant number of votes on the House floor and the Senate floor to run for cover.
Right.
When you say new revenue, that is a bumper sticker for, uh-oh, I might lose in a Republican primary.
And even when, Senator, the new revenue being proposed was being proposed by Republicans.
Right.
Kevin Elfife, Tommy Williams, Drew Darby. Right?
That's right. And very thoughtful approaches. Well, and Tommy Williams.
Tommy
Williams. Williams, who had the credentials, in my view, both of being a conservative Republican, but also somebody with expertise in having chaired the Senate Transportation Committee. And you had two sets of things that came in. One was raise the vehicle registration fee. That would have given new money where it hadn't been raised in typical fashion. It hadn't been raised in decades. It would, if we'd have raised it, it would have put us in kind of the middle tier of the states. So that was one. The other was take sales tax revenue from the sale of motor vehicles, or you had a variation on motor vehicle parts. Well, a lot of us kind of recoiled at that, because what that does is that takes money out of the budget. It may be arguably new revenue in that you're getting new sales tax
but
in,
it just moves.
But it just,
yeah.
in my opinion, it's one of the great diversions. Well, so to some degree, as I'm listening to myself talk here, part of what may have well happened is you have competing approaches, and so they ended up competing against each other, both with issues that create problems and nothing that everybody could immediately get behind, like we were able to do on water and with regard to education. And so that may have been a key factor. At the very end of the session, in my opinion, a very good proposal was put out. And it was put out by Chairman Nichols, who currently chairs Senate Transportation and was a commissioner at TxDOT. And when I first got to know him, I was mayor of Austin and he was at TxDOT. So we go way back in terms of working on transportation, and Chairman Williams. And what the proposal was is take severance tax money. You started seeing it in the newspaper a little bit here in the last couple of days. The severance tax money that goes into the rainy day fund, the way that works is, and this is very general, but the way it works is the first 25% of that goes to public education. And then using a 1987 baseline and with some calculations, everything above the baseline, 25%, and the rest of it goes to general revenue, 25 to education, general revenue, and then you hit a baseline, 25% goes to general revenue, and 75% goes to the rainy day fund. When it was put together, when that was done, nobody anticipated this amount of money going into the rainy day fund, or the economic stabilization fund, as it's really called. So what the proposal was is continue to have the 25% go to general revenue, and of the 75%, cut that in half. 50% go to the rainy day fund, and 50% go to Fund 6, the transportation fund. That would allow for a great amount
of money.
It's a lot of money, which would allow for an enormous amount of bonding capacity, which would allow us to do better by transportation. That was put out as a proposal at the very end. The House was not in favor of it. But I think that's got some legs to it. I think that is something that, had that happened earlier in the session, might have been something people could get behind.
And the chairman is trying to resurrect it. Senator, are you opposed, Chairman, are you opposed to these new revenue sources?
We need to lay it all out and see the impact. The last idea that Senator Watson talked about, that Senator Nichols brought forth, is an interesting idea. But I step back to the amount of dollars that we had. Did we spend them efficiently and wisely? Were there tax breaks to continue the growth of business? Which, look, the reason Texas is in such better shape than any other state, and especially California, a big state that we can compare ourselves to, is because whether you agree or disagree with the policy, the proof is that a lighter regulatory hand and lower taxes on business has propelled our economy, creating jobs at really a record growth compared to the rest of the country. And so my first inclination is not to look how we can spend more money, how we can generate more business that grows our overall budget, which allows us to have the money to address these
But you
issues.
fully acknowledge that in the absence of enough water, in the absence of good roads, in the absence of good schools, our pickpocketing of the other states is going to come to an end.
I don't know that we're pickpocketing other states. I think people are coming here.
What else would you call it?
I think people, what I would call it is people are coming to the last place in America where you can live the American dream and be an entrepreneur.
I think we're saying it a different way.
That's not pickpocketing. Pickpocketing is if we're going after, people are coming here of their own free will.
The governor sure has a busy travel schedule.
Well, the governor is not sitting waiting for the mail to come in. The governor seems to be going to other states to take states' businesses back to Texas.
I think that's a part of his job. Come to Texas.
Let me say three things. One is, we know right here in Central Texas and Austin that businesses that have been established part of our business community for some time are asking us questions about water.
Yep.
So,
and we're addressing it.
Well, let me finish. What that means is that whatever may be the reason that we're having this sort of growth, people are looking to the future and saying, am I going to be able to continue to grow, and are you going to take care of that infrastructure need? Right. I frankly think we had a very good session with regard to water. I am very happy where that ended up. I'm particularly happy that 20% of that funding will go for conservation, because the cheapest water, to use the efficiency talk, the cheapest water we've got is the water we already have, and we need to be putting, and think about that. I don't know of any other time that the state of Texas has actually put money into something like conservation. But people are asking that question. They're asking about the future. The other questions they're asking about is about our other infrastructure, including our road infrastructure. And we've got to do something about that, or we're going to be in real trouble. And it's not. And when we have funding sources, let's go back to this very good idea I think that Senator Nichols has. When we talk about funding sources that are available, that's not a new tax. There's no new tax there. It is revenue that is going into a fund that for some reason we have made almost biblical. Matthew, Mark, Luke, rainy day fund, John. And for some reason it's money that is the money of the people of this state that could be spent on the needs of the people of this state, but yet we refuse to do that. So I actually think that one of the reasons that has some legs to it is no new tax.
Yep.
It's money already there. You can have a healthy rainy day fund. And then some people we're just going to have to talk about how we spend it in the right way.
Right, and again, I'm not rejecting that plan out of hand. I'm just saying I think now we take a look at that plan and it has some merit.
All right, we're going to go to the audience in a second, but I've got to ask about 2014. Chairman, you sound absolutely like a candidate for lieutenant governor. And I'm hearing all this week from people, watch out for Dan Patrick. He may announce for lieutenant governor at your event on Thursday. Christmas come early, Chairman. Seriously, are you going to run for lieutenant governor?
I've not made the final decision.
But you're thinking about it.
I'm thinking about it.
We hear that your people in Houston are telling you that the lieutenant governor is vulnerable. Certainly everything you're saying today is telegraphing a dissatisfaction with his leadership of the budget on down. So? Would you dispute that? Everything you're saying
Don't
is
look at me, man. This is all yours. Go for it. Yeah. In fact, I'll join with Evan. I'd like to hear this too.
Yeah. This is the poker tell of all time. I mean, you are telegraphing that you intend to do something other than come back in the same job next time.
You know, if
his staff is choking. Hang on a second.
Is that right? Somebody give Logan CPR.
You know and I assumed you would ask this question.
Really?
The real answer is, Evan, I really love education. I think we've done a good job because of the team of the business community, both parties, others. If I thought I could come back as education chair and be free to continue reforms and improving public education, my wife and I would both be much happier to go home, take a trip, not have to campaign for 10 months and come back as education chair. But right now we have 3 people in the race. There's no guarantee who's going to be our lieutenant governor.
Right.
And so I don't know what my future would be. And I'd hate to be in a situation coming back where I didn't have chance to be a leading voice on public education. So that's a factor. Number two is, if you look at, we don't know what Governor Perry's going to do. Just for the sake of argument right now, let's just say there's a change there. That would mean there'd be a change at the Attorney General's office. That means 5 out of 6 statewide will be new. Land Commissioner, unless Staples would go back, Patterson would go back. Ag Commissioner, unless Staples would go back.
Comptroller.
Comptroller. Attorney General, if there's a move at the governor's mansion, and governor. And so the lieutenant governor would be the only position right now that's not, and we still don't know about governor, but and again, Rick Perry may run, and who knows.
So you're absolutely looking at this race?
Sure. I'm at a point in my life and my career that, again, if I could come back with certainty, with the freedom to lead the Education Committee, but that's not assured. And I spend so much time away, all of us do, spend so much time away from our families, and it gets harder. If you're going to come to Austin and take 6 months out of your life, plus the time in the interim, and
for the high pay.
Yeah, and for the high pay, and asked your family to sacrifice. My wife and I have been married 38 years. It's a lot to ask her to sit home a week at a time, or 2 weeks at a time, for me to come here and do this job. I want it to have meaning. And so I don't have any great ambition to have a higher title. I don't even like being called senator. People know I prefer being called Dan. But I do believe that I may be in a situation where my options are limited.
And you're dissatisfied with Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, or else you wouldn't be considering running?
No, it has nothing to do with Lieutenant Governor
How can it not have anything to do with it? Why would you think about challenging a sitting Lieutenant Governor unless you were dissatisfied?
No. Why couldn't it just be about a vision that I might have for the direction our Senate and our state should go? It doesn't, politics doesn't always have to be against something. Politics can be for something. And if I were to run the race, I would do my very best to run the most positive campaign as I did when I ran for the Senate, and talk about issues that are important to the people. I think people are tired of people nitpicking and attacking each other, and it would have nothing to do with the other candidates. I don't want to be in a box, and Senator Watson can, I think, maybe relate to this, but the other Republicans can. You're going to have all three, Patterson, Staples, and Dewhurst, all looking for support. And
they're already looking for support.
They're already from other senators,
yeah.
and I just want to be in that box. I want to be free to do what I think is best for the state.
I'm not endorsing today. If you're getting ready to ask
I was going to ask you that. I do have one. I'm going to ask you one quick one because we're going a little long, and then I want to give the audience in here. What Senator Patrick says is true. What Chairman Patrick says is true. You're going to have the most open races on this ballot coming up at any time since 1990, if only the Democrats were alive.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how you only talked in terms of primary.
Well, the reality is you look at what happened yesterday on the announcement of Comptroller Combs not running again, and it was a parade of Republican candidates. I didn't hear a peep from a single Democrat on that race or any other. Now, maybe it's early, but Senator Watson, what are we going to do on that?
It's very early, and there's been a lot of pent-up ambition on the Republican side because it's been so static for so long that the minute there was a break, meant there was just a little hole in the dam, everybody's going to start doing that. So I wasn't surprised by that at all, and I won't be surprised if you don't have serious Democratic candidates.
Can you tell me can you name one Democrat who would be a plausible and serious statewide? You won't.
I won't do it today.
Why don't you ask him if he's considering running statewide? He's done that once.
He's not.
Okay.
He is not.
Any other Democrat senators that you know?
I just said I'm not going to engage in that for others. But we just finished a regular session. Combs doing that surprise caused what you saw yesterday. Everybody felt the need. There's been a lot of pent-up ambition and frustration over there, so people had to get things out on the Republican side because of that. I think you will get a little bit of time between.
Still time for your side.
I have no question that's the case, but we're not even out of the session yet. Right. So it's very early.
Okay, very well. Let's give these guys a hand. Good sports. Glad they're here. Thank you.
Appreciate you.